The bodies of 6 hostages have been retrieved from the Gaza Strip. This development was confirmed by the Israeli Defense Forces. A statement by the IDF identifies the bodies of the hostages as Yagev Bushtab, Alexander Dasik, Avram Munda, Yoram Metzger, Nadav Popowell, and Haim Perry. The rescue operation was carried out in Khan Yunis area of Gaza by the IDF alongside the Israel Security Agency Shin Bet. In a separate statement, the Hostage Families Forum said the recovery of the bodies had provided families and loved ones with necessary closure, adding that the return of the remaining 109 hostages from Gaza can only be achieved through a negotiated deal. The statement also called on the Israeli government to do everything in its power to finalize the deal currently on the table. Meanwhile, United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken has announced that Israel has accepted a proposal brought by Washington. Mr. Blinken was addressing a press conference Monday night. He said there is a fierce urgency to get the deal over the finish line as Israel braces for a possible Iranian attack as a reprisal for the assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, a move likely to provoke a wider conflict in the Middle East. It comes after the latest round of ceasefire negotiations in Doha from Thursday to Friday, with support from Egypt and Qatar. The U.S. submitted a proposal to both sides that would narrow the differences between them and align with the principles set by President Joe Biden in May.
This is now my 9th trip to the region since October 7th. And President Biden asked me to come back on this trip with 2 main goals in mind. The first is to reaffirm the commitment of the United States to Israel's security. That's a commitment that we put into practice virtually every day since October 7th, including when Israel was attacked directly by Iran back in April. In recent weeks, given the heightened tensions, we have deployed additional assets to the region. The purpose of the deployment of these assets is not to provoke aggression, but rather to deter, to make sure that it doesn't happen. But also to make clear that if it does, we are fully prepared to defend Israel. Second purpose was to further the intense efforts we're engaged in across our government to bring an agreement for a ceasefire in Gaza and the release of hostages across the finish line. That is the single best way, obviously, to get hostages home, to get an enduring ceasefire that also reflects Israel's security interests, to relieve the terrible daily suffering of Gazans, men, women, and children, desperate for food to eat, for shelter, and for staying out of harm's way. Just last week, the president put forward a proposal with Qatar and with Egypt to try to bridge the gaps that remain between the parties so that we could get agreement to what the president put out there a couple of months ago. In a very constructive meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu today, he confirmed to me that Israel accepts the bridging proposal, that he supports it. It's now incumbent on Hamas to do the same. These are still complex issues, and they're going to require hard decisions by the leaders. Ultimately, it comes down to those decisions, but there is, I think, a real sense of urgency here across the region on the need to get this over the finish line and to do it as soon as possible. The United States is deeply committed to getting this job done, to getting it done now.
Well, in the meantime, Hamas has accused the United States of merely buying time for Israel to continue its genocide by proposing an amended accord. The group insists that a ceasefire deal must result in a permanent end to Israel's war on Gaza. Hamas spokesperson Osama Hamdan said on Monday the Israelis have retreated from issues included in Biden's proposal. Netanyahu's talk about agreeing to an updated proposal indicates that the U.S. administration has failed to convince him to accept the previous agreement. Speaking at the Democratic National Convention Monday night, President Joe Biden said that Hamas was backing away from the deal agreed to by Israel. Hamas has reacted to this, saying the comment is misleading and that it is eager to reach a deal, but the new provisions contradict the earlier framework. I have joining us now in the studio, Acting Head of Department Public Law at Prime University in Abuja, Mr. Chuk Me. Thank you so much for joining us on The World Today.
Thank you, Marachi.
Been a while we had you here in the studio. It's great that you're here.
I miss all of you.
We miss you too.
The Lagos studio.
Yeah, and it's great to have you here because, I mean, this ceasefire deal is right on the table for Israel and for Hamas. And then you have the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who made his 9th trip to Israel. He's also participating in the negotiations in Doha. Hamas thinks that, the U.S. deal is only buying Israel time. Antony Blinken saying that Israel has agreed to Washington's version of the proposal is only buying Israel time on this deal. What do you think is really going on?
What is really going on is that they have irreconcilable differences. There are 3 major geographical locations that Hamas have had full control before, that they don't want Israel to control now, and Israel really want to control it. We have, I think, the Nasrallah corridor, the Philadelphia corridor, and the Rafah crossing. Rafah crossing is between Egypt and Palestine, and Gaza, anyway. And the Egyptian side certainly will be controlled by Egypt.
Yeah.
But Israel wants to control the Palestinian side, which had earlier been controlled by Hamas, in order to prevent smuggling of weapons. Hamas will not take any of that because it sees it as stifling its economy, because with the blockade in the sea, the East major crossing, the Rafah crossing into Egypt, is from there they do all they want to do concerning their country. They've perfected it, and they wouldn't want Israel to. That's one major factor of irreconcilable difference. And the other one is about ceasefire. Israel does not want to just pack their things and walk away because they need the hostages. They want a situation they will stay for a while. There will be a pause. The hostages will be released, and there will be a period of gradual return to the status quo ante bellum. So they don't want a situation whereby you just come in and say, Israel, all your soldiers, leave Palestinian territory. But that is what Hamas wants.
But that is practical, isn't it? I mean, because Israel does see Hamas as a terrorist group, and Hamas has perfected, Hamas has perfected the art of hiding, the weapons coming in. You speak about, the Rafah crossing, where they have, created a tunnel as well. And in the course of the Israeli attacks on Gaza, we've seen tunnels built underground that extend as far into, headed towards Israel and so on. So Israel does see Hamas as a terrorist group. So it kind of would make sense, if the IDF forces do not leave Gaza immediately after, a ceasefire deal is agreed by both sides.
However, Israel sees Hamas is not sufficient because, if Hamas is just a terrorist group, why is Israel negotiating with Hamas? Though indirectly, because Qatar and Egypt tends to, they are the guarantors of Hamas. Yeah. So these pieces of documents, they are sent to Qatar and Egypt. They will forward to Hamas. Hamas will send to them. So if they can negotiate with them, whether directly or indirectly, so it becomes argumentative to what extent they can do without Hamas, whether as a terrorist group or... Hamas is indispensable in several ways. At least you need some people to talk to, and that is Hamas. So basically, whatever happens, Hamas is still relevant. So, but it is Israel is standing between the Scylla and the Charybdis. One of the purposes of going to the war is to permanently stamp out Hamas, to stop being a strategic security impediment to survival in Israel.
And possibly leader of Gaza. I mean, the authority in Gaza.
Yes, even without being basically no other authority will be able to take away Gaza from Hamas.
Yeah, but that's another thing that really hasn't been discussed, has it? What will happen post-war?
Yes.
Who has legitimate authority over Gaza when the war is over? That hasn't made it to the table yet.
The Fatah group, headed by Abbas and Hamas, I think they are having rapprochement. They feel it should be left to the Palestinian people to determine who their leaders will be. So you won't come from outside to say, okay, it should be Fatah, it should be Hamas. But Israel wants to have a stake because of their security. And they don't want to go to war in vain. They don't want to lose their soldiers in vain. They don't want October 7 to be in vain. Because since the extermination of the Jews during the Second World War, Israel had never lost 1,319 persons in one day. So they see it as genocidal act, which if not put in the board, if nothing is done, could be repeated, especially with the support of Hezbollah, Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Iran.
Yeah, some people would disagree, though. They would say what Israel is currently doing in Gaza is the genocide, not what happened on October 7. But let's move forward. The retrieval of 6 hostage bodies. I know that the families already said, that does provide some closure, but they did expect that, these hostages would have been rescued alive. Do you think that there is some discomfort here with the fact that the hostages died and who can take responsibility for their deaths?
Yes, there is discomfort. Since they were in the custody of Hamas, so the primary responsibility will be taken by Hamas. The secondary responsibility will be taken by Israel. Because some people in Israel assume that if Israel had been quick in getting a ceasefire deal, perhaps these people that have died wouldn't have died. So, but people have been dying on both sides. And those who are in custody of them certainly will take the primary responsibility. Remember the case filed at the International Court of Justice by South Africa regarding that everything should be done by Israel to avoid an act of genocide in Gaza. So you are aware of the position of the ICJ, which has ordered Israel to take all steps to avoid taking any measure that will lead to violation of the Genocide Convention of 1948, which defined the crime of genocide.
To your knowledge so far, do you think that either side has violated this law on genocide?
The wise men of the ICJ have not come to that position. And I have now read all the materials involved. When matters of this nature comes before an intellectual researcher, we are not always in a hurry to jump to conclusions. We want to piece research and come to a conclusion based on research findings and not based on captions in newspapers, in journals, in online. No. We don't. So basically, I rely upon the decision of the ICJ in the case between South Africa and Israel. And it says, yes, there is likelihood that if Israel is not prevented from continuing the war, it will lead to genocide. But there is no conclusion that a genocide has been committed. But the signs are there. The signs are there because the morning tells the day. So all the signs of genocide are glaring in that war. And that's why both sides should cease continuing with the war. They should come to a compromise. The statement of Osama Hamdan that America is buying time should be attenuated by the parties going back to the round table and Egypt and Qatar and United States ensuring that this war is brought to an end, because it has consumed about 40,000 people. About 92,000 people have been wounded, and going by the statistics of the Ministry of Health in Gaza.
Yeah, the death toll is worrying, especially for the Gaza Health Ministry that keeps trying to update, even though, some of the figures are questionable.
Sure.
But, it just keeps trying to update us on the number of people killed. I want to talk about the U.S. role in this, mediating efforts. And some have said the U.S. cannot be mediating because they're also, in a way, participants to this war. They're supplying Israel with weapons to fight Gaza. So on what basis are they coming in as mediators?
You see, in law, context is everything. Within the context, is Qatar not supplying any of the parties weapons?
It is.
Intelligence, ideas. So singling out U.S. for this, it doesn't gel. The United States had always been playing more than one role. And even those that negotiate with, talk with the U.S. diplomats, they are aware. So you see their mediatory role. And if mediation fails, you'll also know what they could do. So, but in the context of negotiation, you can see Blinken has been running through the various countries, trying to piece things together. So it takes two to tango. And virtually, at the end of the day, parties must agree. There must be consensus addendum. There is no way the United States will ram this decision of positions down the throats of the parties. So whether it's playing a mediatory role or not, do you have something better than what they are doing? The answer is no. And it can have its way at the United Nations Security Council. That's why you just have to at least give them a listening ear, because whatsoever you agree, they can cause it to be passed at the United, not 100% sure, but substantially so, that they can cause it to be passed at the United Nations Security Council.
So thankfully, there does seem to be some breakthrough, with this ceasefire deal. But what could be a deal breaker for both parties?
A war that has taken place for 10 months. A deal breaker will definitely, there is no deal breaker that will favor the two sides. Why did I say so? One, if you allow Israeli army to stay permanently in Gaza, then many Palestinians will ask, why has Hamas waited for this long, allowed 40,000 people to be killed, and still granted what they didn't want to grant at the beginning? So meaning the whole war effort would have been in vain on the part of Hamas. And if Israel takes any step that will make it weaker, one, it will lead to the ouster of Benjamin Netanyahu as Prime Minister of Israel. Beyond his political ouster, his name will be found in the book of infamy, because, and that his case will even be a sacrificial case that will make him suffer more than his brother, who was a hero at the Entebbe raid in 1976 in Uganda. Jonathan Netanyahu, his brother, was killed in that situation. And since then, he has been a hero of the people. So if Benjamin, I use Benjamin because the Jews prefer calling it that way, though in English it's Benjamin. Benjamin Netanyahu will either fall into infamy based on the outcome of this war, and his Political opponents are waiting for him to roast him dry. You are aware of the parliamentary nature of the Israeli politics. So he's working on the tightrope. Even his the allegations of corruption against him and some other issues, all of them will be brought back.
He will have to face all.
So that's why I said his name will, and the hostages will never forgive him.
No, neither the families.
Neither the families. In fact, so it will be devastating. It will be better for him. In fact, it will amount to committing political suicide if he takes a step that people will read that he has fought in vain, he has made Israel weaker, or he has prepared Israel for another attack. They also see that if this is not properly prosecuted, this will be a playbook for Hezbollah to take the next step to railroad his fighters into northern Israel or any part of Israel. And certainly that will be the beginning of the end of the bravery and courage of the Jewish people or the Israelis.
Chukwuemeka Eze, our conversations never end. Thank you so much for joining us on The World Today.
Thank you. So we adjourn the proceedings.
We do adjourn the proceedings.
Thank you.